Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin, and we have Mr. Milius at council table with his colleagues nearby, and Mr. Chesnoff is present also. Mr. Milius, you may resume the video.
Thank you,
when I say the term cadaver note, do you know what I'm referring to? You ever seen the cadaver note?
I think it's first time from your image.
Do you know what Bob Durst's writing looks like?
Yes.
The two of you exchanged plenty of language.
Yes.
I want you to take a look. I'm going to mark it as people's next in order.
24.
24. I'm going to show the envelope first. This will be 24. And I want you to look at this envelope. Okay, last switch.
Okay.
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 Now, have you ever seen that before? And Bob's writing, does that look like Bob Durst's writing to you?
Kind of.
When you say kind of, what do you mean by that?
I don't really have anything to compare it to, so.
Well, you exchanged how many pieces of writing for Bob Durst do you think you've seen in the 40 years you've known him?
I'm not speculate on that.
Is it fair to say a ton of writing?
Bunch.
And if I were to have handed that to you, and I would have said nothing else, and I would have said, hey, listen, Emily Altman, whose writing does that look like? Wouldn't your response have been, out of everyone in the world that you know, you said, you know, that looks like Bob's writing. Have you ever known Bob to misspell the word Beverly?
I've never seen him write the word Beverly before, so.
Do you know the circumstance of the cadaver note, where it was found, what the history of it is?
It was found in the police department.
Would you agree, ma'am, that in testifying today, that if you were to say that, yeah, that looks like Bob's writing, that that's not a positive thing for Mr. Durst? Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure how much you know about it. I want to go to the inside, to the actual note. Mark as people's next in order.
25.
Does that similarly look like Bob Durst's writing?
I think so.
And if I were to say to you, I just put that up, and I didn't tell you what it was, and I didn't tell you who wrote it, and I said, I have this piece of paper, and I said, does this look like anybody's writing that you know? Isn't it true, ma'am, that you would have said, you know what, that looks like Bob Durst's writing?
Yes.
Did Bob tell you, near the time of Susan's murder?
I'm not just beginning to.
Oh, no, we're done with that. Okay. Did he tell you, near the time of Susan's murder, that he was planning on visiting her in Los Angeles?
Think so.
And do you recall specifically what he told you about that?
Not specifically, but something along the lines of he was, visiting LA.
And this was going to be in December of 2000, correct? Did you ask him, when he told you he was in LA at the time Susan was murdered, Beverly Hills, did you ask him, hey Bob, did you see Susan while you were down there?
No.
Did he tell you whether or not he saw Susan?
No.
He was down there. Have you ever told Mr. Bassett that Bob Durst told you that he was planning or that he had visited Susan Berman in Los Angeles near the time of her?
It's possible, but I don't remember.
And when you're saying it's possible, are you saying it's possible because, yes, as you said, Bob Durst told you that, And you may or may not have repeated that to Mr. Bagley, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know who Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerley are?
Yes.
Who Jarecki is Jarecki. Andrew common spelling. Mark is Marc. Last name Smerling. Who are they?
They're producers. Excuse me. They're producers who did the show, Jinx.
Have you ever discussed with either Andrew Jarecki or Mark Smerling where Bob Durst was at the time of where Bob Durst told you he was? Sorry, guys. Have you ever discussed with Andrew Jarecki or Mark Smerling that Bob Durst told you that at the time of Susan's murder, he was in Los Angeles at a hotel in Beverly Hills?
I think so.
Which one do you think he told?
I never met Mr. Smerling,
So what did Mr. Jarecki? And when you told this to Mr. Jarecki, did you tell this to him off the record?
No.
So you never told Mr. Jarecki that he could not repeat what you had told him?
No.
So as you sit here today then, if Mr. Jarecki were to come in here and say, you know what, I have a journalistic privilege not to repeat it, is it your understanding that the comment that he made to you, that the comment that you made to him was not made in confidence? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sort of, yeah.
So what I'm asking is, you're basically saying, I believe I told Andrew Jarecki that Bob Durst told me he was in Los Angeles at the time of Susan's murder at the hotel, correct?
Yes, I think so.
Right. And you're saying, and you also have said you did not tell Mr. Jarecki, unlike Mr. Bagley, that this would have been confidential, off the record, etc. Is that correct?
Correct.
So would that mean, ma'am, that if Mr. Jarecki were willing to come in and testify to what you have told him, that you would be willing to release him from any privilege that he might feel he has to you?
That's a difficult question.
Ma'am, why is it difficult?
I don't necessarily believe everything that Andrew Jarecki says.
Well, ma'am, if you're telling me in advance, I told Andrew Jarecki this, you said, I believe I told him. So how would his credibility figure in to him repeating something you're admitting you said?
Because I'm admitting to you I said it, okay? You know, I don't know or not know what Andrew Jarecki was saying that I said to benefit his agenda here.
So you're basically saying, listen, I've got it from the horse's mouth. Bob told me he was in Los Angeles at the time of the murder at the Beverly Hills, and you don't need to get it from Andrew Jarecki. Is that a fair statement?
I think so.
All right, thank you. Very well. We'll resume tomorrow as to...
And Your Honor, I'm going to start the next video, which is the next day.
All right. So, you remain under oath. You may continue your examination.
Ms. Altman, since we adjourned court yesterday, have you spoken with your lawyer about your testimony? Have you talked to your lawyer at all about your testimony?
I talked to my lawyer about doing whenever we finished.
Okay, ma'am, can you answer yes or no? Did you talk to your lawyer about your testimony? Yes or no?
Not really, no.
Since yesterday, have you talked to the lawyers, any of the 5 Mr. Durst lawyers, about your testimony?
Have I spoken to them about my testimony?
Yeah.
No.
Ma'am, in the time since you've been in court, have you had time to consider and to think about your testimony in this case?
Yes.
And have you done so?
Yes.
After having more time, have you changed your mind regarding my request that you release Mr. Bagley from any confidential agreement that he has with you so that he can release the information that you had previously provided to him regarding Mr. Durst?
I still am not willing to.
And are your reasons the same as they were yesterday?
Yes.
Is there any different reason?
No.
Okay. I want to talk about Morris Black. Do you know who Morris Black is?
Yes.
Now, other than the information you might have learned from your husband, did you become aware that Mr. Durst was a suspect in Morris Black's murder, killing shortly after the crime occurred? Your Honor, I would ask, other than a conversation with Mr. Durst or a conversation with your husband, did you learn shortly after Morris Black had been killed that Bob Durst was a suspect in that case?
I can't tell you in sequence whether I first learned it from my husband or from the media.
Now, did you learn from the media? Did you hear in the media shortly after Morris Black was killed that Bob Durst was a suspect?
At some point I read it. I don't know if it was shortly after or, you're asking me for time sequence and I can't give those to you. You are.
Did you hear that information near the time, within 6 months after Morris Black was killed, that Bob Durst was a suspect?
Within 6 months, probably.
And when you heard that, was your response, oh my God, there's no way my best friend Bob Durst could have done this? Was that your response?
You ask me questions that honestly are inflammatory, and I'm going to try to answer the best I can. You are, and I'm going to try to answer it the best I can. Okay? Was I shocked that Bob was accused of the murder? Yes, I was shocked.
Now, would you describe Bob Durst as a private person?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, knowing Bob Durst over the course of the years that you've known him, is Bob the kind of guy to give somebody a key to his apartment?
I don't know.
It was asked, what I asked was, is Bob Durst the kind of person, based on your knowledge and experience with him, that you would expect would give a key to his apartment to a friend?
I can actually answer this. When I was pregnant with my second child, we lived in Long Island. The hospital was in Manhattan. And Stuart and Bob spoke, and they knew I was in labor. And I didn't think we would have to drive from Long Island to Manhattan when I was in labor. And so he offered us the key to his apartment so that if I was in labor really quickly, I could get to the hospital really quickly. So I guess the answer is yes.
Would you expect that Bob Durst, communicating as a private person, would share a key to his apartment with somebody who wasn't a lifelong friend like yourself?
I'm not in Bob's head, so I can't answer.
Ma'am?
You're asking me for his opinion. I can't give it to you.
Ma'am, I'm asking you based on your knowledge of Bob Durst for 40 to 50 years that you know him. I'm asking you, said he's a private person, based on your experience with him, would you expect that he would give a casual friend a key to his apartment to come and go as they please?
Do you have any idea?
All I can say is when I was pregnant, Bob gave me the key to his apartment. I can't answer what he would do with anyone else. It's not fair of you to ask me to do that.
I'll move on, Your Honor.
Okay.
Were you aware that Bob Durst has alleged that he gave Morris Black a key to his apartment, and this question relates to not anything you learned about attorney-client privilege, but to public information as it was related through the trial?
Probably.
Probably. Now, so my question is, given the Bob Durst that you know, would you have expected that he would have given a key to his residence to a casual friend?
Again, I don't know what Bob would have done with his key or how he felt Mr. Black was a friend.
Ma'am, have you spoken to Dateline regarding Mr. Durst's mental state you and your husband together at the time that Bob Durst was shot?
I'm sorry, was I Bob Durst was shot?
I'm sorry, excuse me. Have you spoken to Dateline regarding Bob Durst's mental state at the time that Morris Black was shot and after the body was being dismembered? Did you speak to Dateline about that?
I don't remember anything else, but probably.
June 19, 2015, code EA401.
He was 26?
Yes.
Is there a transcript in this?
Yes, 26A will be the transcript.
Thank you.
And it's Dateline, the lawsuit is part 4. On June 19th, 2015.
You said what you say. It was an out-of-body experience. It's hard to understand.
The record reflected that is not.
Let me.
This is Altman.
That is Stuart Altman, and sitting next to her is Emily Altman, whose head is shaking back and forth as that statement is being made. Were you present when that interview was conducted?
Excuse me, the reason I'm standing is that it's not specific in the exhibit who's speaking, and it's clear from the clip that was just played that it's not the witnesses.
Record shows so reflect.
Okay. The record shows SA for Stuart Altman. He's speaking. Our position is that we're going to argue that that's an admission, a statement.
Whatever.
All right, ma'am, do you recall that? Do you recall that?
No, I see it.
That was you and your husband talking to Dateline about Bob's mental state, correct?
Correct.
Is it your position that at that time when that interview was conducted, that you and your husband were engaged in an attorney-client relationship with Mr. Durst?
I can't answer that. I'm not an attorney. I don't know.
Now I'm asking you your understanding as Mr. Durst's lawyer's secretary, whether or not you believe in participating in that interview, that you were doing that pursuant to the attorney-client relationship.
I know that Dateline mentioned that my husband was one of Bob's attorneys.
Now, did you discuss with Mr. Durst prior to you going on that you were going to do the interview? Was it your understanding that in doing the interview, that you were doing it as Mr. Durst's attorney, or were you doing it as his Mr. Durst's attorney wife, and doing it as his friend? Ma'am, when you would sign in to visit Bob Durst in New Orleans, did you sign in as an attorney or as a friend?
I wasn't permitted to sign as an attorney because I'm not an attorney.
Ma'am, are you aware that if you go to the New Orleans jail with your husband as an attorney, let me finish. If you go to New Orleans, ma'am, as an attorney, and that attorney has a legal secretary, that they have facilities for an unmonitored attorney visit which the attorney's agents can participate in. Are you aware of that?
No.
Ma'am?
I'm not.
Have you ever visited your husband's clients in jail before?
Yes.
And ma'am, when you visited your husband's clients in jail, did you speak to them separately from your husband?
No.
In fact, ma'am, when you've gone into jail as your husband's secretary, you are assisting him by being in the room when he's speaking to the client, correct?
Not in the case I'm thinking about.
Well, ma'am, you have said that in that case you were with your husband in the room with...
I said I was with my husband in the jail.
Ma'am, have you gone and separately met with your husband's clients in jail when your husband hasn't been there?
No.
And you agree that you did this with Mr. Durst, correct?
But it isn't something. Yes.
You signed in as a friend.
Yes.
When your husband has visited Mr. Durst as his legal secretary, did he sign in as a friend?
No.
He signed in as a lawyer, correct?
Correct.
Ma'am, did you speak during your Dateline interview? Did you speak about Mr. Durst telling you that he was trying to manipulate the jury in Galveston?
I don't remember.
Dateline interview, June 19, 2015, E8402.
Number 7, Akron, Pennsylvania. Okay.
Bob was trying to use every way within his power to look frail when he was on trial in Galveston.
Ma'am, can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, he was trying, he's had a lot of health issues. And he was frail, he was looking frail, and he didn't want people to think of him as this, strapping 60 or 55-year-old man. He was...
Ma'am, so you're telling me that your statement there, you were not saying that Bob was deliberately trying to look frail intentionally in front of the jury to manipulate them. That's not what you meant.
I think Bob was trying to portray who he was rather than who people thought he was. That makes sense to me.
Did you attend the trial in Galveston?
Sometimes.
When you attended the trial, did you sit with the attorneys?
No.
You sat in the audience, correct?
Yes.
And there were issues at the time about people trying to save you a seat. Is that correct?
I don't remember.
Ma'am, where did your husband sit?
Next to me.
And is it your position that in that Galveston trial, you and your husband were still acting as Bob Durst's lawyers?
My husband is Bob's private attorney for a gazillion years, okay? He was not a trial lawyer admitted to practice in Texas. He was there as a counsel, not as a trial attorney.
And were you there to assist your husband in his counsel?
If my husband needed me to help him, yeah, I did.
When Bob Durst was acquitted, do you recall telling the New York Times on November 11, 2003, thank God there was no evidence Bob did anything wrong?
So, but you may, so did you recall saying that?
Yes.
Ma'am, as you sit here today and yesterday, are you aware that if your conversations with Mr. Durst can be characterized as confidential attorney-client communications, then you won't have to answer questions about the things that we discussed? Are you aware of that?
I'm not an attorney, but I don't understand a lot of what you're asking.
Let me ask again. Let me ask again now. As you sit here, isn't it true that you are aware that if the judge rules that you have an attorney-client relationship with Mr. Durst, that there are many questions that you believe you will not have to
Do
answer?
you understand that?
When you say it.
No, I say it. Okay, all right. So, yes, you agree.
Did she suggest she agrees? Ma'am, has your husband Stuart been continually licensed to practice law in New York during the period of time that he was there?
Yes.
Please be seated. Counsel present, witnesses present. You may continue your examination.
Now, do you know about the movie All Good Things?
Yes.
How did you hear about it? And what did Bob tell you about the movie?
It was a movie about him.
And when he talked to you about it, was he clear to you that he'd already seen it, read about it, knew the plot, etc.?
He said he'd seen it.
And is it fair to say that after seeing the movie, Bob liked it?
Yes.
Have you seen the movie?
Yes.
Would you agree, ma'am, that the movie depicts Bob Durst as having personally or through an accomplice killed 3 people and a dog? You don't remember the plot to the movie at all?
Once years ago.
Ma'am, are you aware of any movies being made about your other friends being serial killers?
No.
So I would think you would remember a movie that comes out that depicts...
I remember the movie, I don't remember. Yes.
Ma'am, I want you to assume for a moment that the movie depicts Bob Durst as having killed either himself or through an agent, 3 people and a dog. Is it still your testimony that when you spoke to Mr. Durst, he told you he liked the movie?
Yes.
Did he ever tell you, you know what, gosh, that movie is completely inaccurate?
No.
Did he ever say the movie was inaccurate at all?
Yes.
What did he say was inaccurate?
He was upset the way that he depicted his treatment of the dog.
Isn't it true, ma'am? Bob Durst was not upset that the movie suggested he murdered 3 people, but he was angry that the movie depicted that he had killed his dog Igor, correct?
Yes.
By the way, ma'am, if I were to ask you, the Bob Durst you know, is there any way he would ever kill a dog?
No.
No. You can say that much more confidently than you can, hey, the Bob Durst you know, he never killed a human being, correct?
Yes.
And was Bob Durst very clear to you that the character in the movie, when they changed the name, the main character was him? Correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
And that the people that were portraying the movie, the Kirsten Dunst character was his wife, Kathy, correct?
Yes.
And the woman who was shot in the back of the head was Susan Berman, correct?
Yes.
And the old man was Morris Black, correct? Is that correct?
Morris Black, but okay.
Oh, you don't remember Morris Black?
Not that movie, no.
And in fact, you've told people before coming to court today, you've told people Bob Durst really liked that movie.
He did.
And in fact, he thought that Andrew Jarecki did a very good job of telling his life story, correct? That's what he told you, right?
Yes.
Did you ever say to him, when you had seen the movie and you had thought, did you say to him, hey, Bob, you know, that movie depicts you as a serial killer. Doesn't that bother you? Did you ask him that? Did it occur to you as something you might bring up? Well, no. You've seen a movie where your close friend is depicted as killing 3 people and a dog. You've talked to him about it, and he says, I love the movie, in essence, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
How's my Bob Durst impression? So, and...
Sparrows.
We'll do your own. Do you know who Andrew Jarecki Mark's are?
Yes.
How do you know it?
I know that they produced the name.
And isn't it fair to say now that you've spoken to Mr. Jarecki many times?
I've spoken to him several. I wouldn't say many.
How many times have you spoken to him?
I don't know.
More than 5?
Probably.
More than 10?
No, I don't think so.
And now, isn't it true that you spoke with him with the not just permission, but encouragement of Robert Durst?
Yes.
In fact, you would never have sat down to speak with them unless Mr. Durst had told you, go ahead and talk to him, correct? And in fact, Mr. Durst told you, cooperate with them in every way and give them whatever they want, correct?
Yes.
And that's what you did, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Durst actually encouraged you, wanted you to go on film, correct?
Yes.
You refused to do it, correct?
Correct.
Why did you refuse to go on film with Mr. Jarecki when Mr. Durst was telling you to do it?
I didn't like him.
Yeah. You didn't like him. Were you concerned that by going on film that you might say something that would get Mr. Durst in trouble? And you didn't want to do that, correct?
No.
Am I correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're correct.
Yeah, no, that was my bad question, not your bad answer. Do you recall giving Andrew Jarecki a box of materials that you had received from Bob Durst. And by giving to Andrew Durst, you were his people.
Yes.
And you gave him that box at Mr. Durst's direction, correct?
Yes.
In fact, and you told Mr. Batley that in fact, Bob Durst had told you, give them this box, correct?
I don't remember what I told Mr. Batley, but I admitted I gave him the box.
Sure. Let me have you read. I'm going to give you the New York Times article from January 14, 2017.
June 14th, correct?
April 20, this week, April 22nd. Right? 28?
May I approach, Your Honor?
April 28.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you can reject it.
Second. Did you see it? One second. Put it out. I just want you to focus. That was, this is an article that relates to a conversation you had with Mr. Bagley. Do you remember talking to Mr. Bagley? This was not 30 years ago. This was a little over a month ago. Do you recall this?
Yes.
And you're quoted as saying, regarding the BD story, that there was a box. It was included in an unopened box of documents that Ms. Altman turned over to the neighbors of the Jinx at Mr. Durst's request. Is that correct?
Mostly.
Well, did you say that to Mr. Bagley?
Yeah, but there were also times, it was a box, I did give it to the Jinx, but I also had, I would put articles that, that were from the newspapers and stuff. It was like a collection of stuff.
Right, so what I'm asking now is, you received the box from Mr. Durst, correct? You received a box from Mr.
I
Durst.
received material. We received stuff
From
put in the
Mr.
box.
Right, and Mr. Durst told you, give this stuff to Andrew directly, correct?
He said cooperate and give him what you have, yeah.
And that meant that box, correct?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you know what was in the box?
Aside from the articles, the newspaper articles, no.
One second. Do you remember telling Andrew directly at any point in time that you believe the contents of the box were about Kathy Durst?
The newspaper articles, yeah.
So now, if you didn't know what was in the box, how did you know it was about Kathy Durst?
I knew that I put newspaper articles in the box. I also knew that if you had envelopes or other stuff, I just put it in, didn't open stuff.
So, in those boxes, you later learned, was a copy of what's been commonly called the BD story.
Yes.
And that is something you received from Mr. Durst, correct?
Yes.
And that is something he told you that he wanted turned over to Mr. Jarecki, correct?
He just said give him whatever you had. I mean, he wasn't specific.
Well, now, he sent you the BD story, correct? You didn't have it. He sent it to you.
Yes.
And then he told you to turn over that stuff to Mr. Jarecki, correct?
Yes.
And that's what you did, is that right?
Yes.
Did you ever indicate to Mr. Jarecki in any way that the contents of those materials were privileged?
No.
Did Bob Durst ever represent you in any way that the contents of that box were privileged and that he did not want them turned over to Jarecki?
No.
And in fact, had he done so, he would never have turned them over, correct? I want to show you what Martin People's next in order.
It's a 33-page document.
All right.
Matt? have you ever seen this document before?
No. I mean, I know you attached it to the papers when you subpoenaed us.
Yes.
I didn't do that.
Okay, no, that's not what I mean. Ma'am, you did an interview with Dateline, is that correct? I assume you watched the episode of Dateline, correct?
Yes.
They had a copy of the DVD story. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you give it to them?
I gave them the same stuff that I gave Mr. Durst. To Mr. Durst.
So now I'm going to ask you again. Did you give them the DVD story?
Yeah.
So, if you gave Dateline the DVD story, I assume you knew what you were giving them, correct?
No, it's not correct.
Well, did you give them the documents, Dateline? Was that your own idea, or was it, again, Mr. Durst telling you, give Dateline whatever they want?
No, he didn't. He didn't tell me to give them anything.
So, were you turning over the documents to Dateline? Did you believe that you were doing that pursuant to your attorney-client relationship with Mr. Durst?
I don't know, I just thought that I was giving him the same stuff that Mr. Durst.
So was your position then that because Mr. Durst had authorized you to give the media, Mr. Jarecki, copies of this material, that then it was okay to give Mr. Dean the same stuff?
Yes.
When you did your interview with Mr. Dean, do you remember when that took place?
May or June of 2015.
You know, I previously played you a clip of a phone call. I believe I played it. I'm not sure if I did now. Let me just read it again right now and ask you, did Mr. Durst comment to you after seeing the Dateline tapes?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He said he loved it.
At any point did he tell you, my God, Emily, you violated my attorney-client privilege?
No.
Can you mention, my God, the EE story, how did you release that?
No.
He said nothing of the kind, correct?
Correct.
In fact, during that call, he told you, quote, you were great, absolutely, correct?
I don't remember exactly. But
Okay, let me play it. EA006.
30. It was 30.
38.
30 and 38.
You were complete. Absolutely love wings. And even poverty. In addition to being great and look skinny.
Do you recall this now?
yes.
Do you recall during the same phone call, Bob Durst also telling you, that he made your night by telling you that you were great and that you looked thin?
Yeah, I'd like someone to tell me what the fact.
And now, I want to go back a second. You had told me, if that ever happens to me, if someone ever tells me I look thin, I'll tell you. That's not happened. Can you let me know, you said before you never looked at the BD document, correct?
No.
If you gave a copy to Mr. Jarecki, how was it that you had a second copy to give to Mr. Dean if you didn't copy it to what he
I
had?
didn't have a second copy.
So how was it that you ended up, so I gave Mr. Dean the same stuff that I gave to Mr. Jarecki?
Because Mr. Durst returned the stuff, and I never opened it, so I just, it was the same
Oh,
stuff.
God, okay. And is it fair to say that Mr. Durst has never said to you anything about the impropriety of you turning over the BD story? Correct?
Correct.
Did Bob Durst tell you during your conversation on June 20, 2015, that he was prepared to hate the show, but he didn't?
I don't remember.
6/20/15, 1926. Your Honor, is P29, I think, is that the
BD story?
ma'am? Ma'am,
He's
is
asking me that from you.
no, it's my fault. I didn't understand. I've got to know, so I misspoke. Ma'am, is the document that I'm giving you, does that appear to be one of the documents that you gave to Mr. Jarecki?
You know what, I never, Mr. Durant. I saw the stuff that you put, they put it down to what you put in your subpoena, but I really didn't look.
Okay, ma'am, I want to play 6/20/15/1926. The EA knows our way.
And is this 31 and 31A? A new document, a new,
Yes.
exhibit?
31 and 31A.
Yeah.
Now, the law says will be able to show, well, not will be able to show at all. Most of the names who doesn't show.
Robert G. And he's one of the most honorable people I've ever met in my life.
So who was his name?
Dean.
His first name is Robert?
Yeah, I wrote that R.D. initials.
Robert Dean. And he had all the other shows too.
Well, he's done the Oscar Pistorius one, and he also worked on Sex in the City. But he was so honest and so honorable that it was amazing.
Well, I absolutely like him. There are very few of those times I absolutely like him.
Ma'am, did Robert Durst tell you that he had done the DVD commentary for all the things? Has Robert Durst ever said to you, you know what, I did not say those things that are depicted that I said on the Jinx? Have you had conversations about the Jinx with Mr. Durst as friends, separate from your representation? So, ma'am, but I'm giving you the clarification. I'm not asking in terms of the Jinx being aired. So maybe the first question is, when did you find out that Mr. Durst had done interviews with Andrew Durecki?
When he said he would give Mr. Durecki the stuff, I just assumed that he had interviewed with him going, but I don't know his history.
Is it your position that you did not know that he was going to do any of the interviews with Mr. Durecki before he did them?
He had talked about doing some interviews, but I didn't know he was going to do them.
I want to play, again, this is from that same Dateline episode, it's code EA404.
You're asking me what I used to say. I don't remember what I used to say.
So 32?
Okay.
32? 32A?
I beg you not to do it. I beg you not to do it.
What he did, only God knows.
What did he think he would get out of it? So I be able to show that he's not a monster, he's not a horrible person.
Ma'am, does that refresh your memory that in fact you were aware before you did the interviews, in fact you tried to convince him not to do it?
My husband tried to convince him not to do it. We didn't know that he didn't listen until after it was there. No, we didn't. My husband asked him not to do it. Okay?
Yes, ma'am, did you ever discuss with him doing the interviews for the Jinx before they happened? And I mean the interviews with Andrew Durecki. Did you talk to Bob Durst about the interviews he was going to do with Andrew Durecki? So you can answer.
You can ask.
Again, did you speak to Bob Durst about his interviews with Mr. Durecki?
Before or after?
Okay, did you speak to him about them before?
No.
Did you speak to him about them after?
Yes.
Okay, when did your conversations with Mr. Durst about these interviews with Mr. Durecki occur?
I think it occurred after he was arrested.
And would these have been phone conversations? To the best of your memory?
I don't know.
scene. All right, it's after lunch. We're late for lunch. We'll be adjourned until 1:30. All right. Ms. Altman is present. Your name and oath. Counsel is here. Counsel for Mr. Durst is here. Mr. Durst is here. The people are present.
You indicated that you had conversations with Mr. Jarecki. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you relate to Mr. Jarecki any statements Mr. Durst made to you about the disappearance of his wife? Did you ever relate to Mr. Jarecki that Mr. Durst had told you that Kathy died accidentally? Ma'am, you just said that you're not sure if you told Mr. Jarecki if Bob Durst ever told you that Kathy Durst was killed accidentally. Is that correct?
Would you say that again?
Ma'am, would you expect that you would remember if, in fact, you had made that statement to Mr. Jarecki?
No.
Ma'am, if you had made that statement to Mr. Jarecki, would it have been with Bob Durst's permission, with what you said before, tell Mr. Jarecki whatever he wants, give Mr. Jarecki whatever he wants?
I don't know.
Ma'am, if Bob Durst had told you prior to your conversation with Mr. Jarecki that his wife had died while he was present accidentally, isn't that something that you would remember today?
Probably. But I don't.
Ma'am, isn't it true that you would not have related any information to Andrew Jarecki without Mr. Durst's permission?
Probably without Mr. Durst's permission, probably not. All he said was...
Ma'am, at the time that you spoke to Mr. Jarecki, did you do so with Mr. Durst's permission? And in fact, isn't it true that you have never spoken to Mr. Jarecki without Mr. Durst's permission?
Mr. Durst only spoke to me once about speaking to Mr. Jarecki.
And he told you cooperate with him fully, correct?
No? Yes.
He told you give him whatever he wants, correct?
Whatever I have, not whatever else.
He's encouraged you to sit down and do a filmed interview with him, correct?
Yes, which I didn't do.
Ma'am, isn't it true that Mr. Durst has never told you, since he gave you permission, told you to give Andrew Jarecki what he wants and cooperate with him, that he has never told you, you know what, you're not to do that anymore? That is correct.
That's correct.
Let's begin your cross-examination.
Witness. You feel like you've been bullied?
Yes, sir.
Your husband, Stuart Altman, is a lawyer, correct?
Yes.
He's also Mr. Durst's longtime friend. And you are also Mr. Durst's longtime friend. But you work in Mr. Altman's, your husband's office. And so, have there been not only criminal cases, but also civil cases and other general matters that Stuart Altman has been Bob Durst's lawyer? In fact, does Bob Durst, from time to time, seek out Stuart Altman's counsel on matters that other lawyers are representing Mr. Durst on?
Yes.
Take, for instance, the Galveston case. Was Stuart Altman on the trial team?
No.
was he acting as a lawyer for Robert Durst throughout that argument? And since that time, has Stewart, on frequent occasions, been called on by Bob for legal advice? Has that practice, that is, that Bob Durst would call on Stewart Altman from time to time for counseling and advice, continue up to this very day?
Yes.
Now, you are not a lawyer, but you have had some experience as a legal secretary for a number of years, haven't you?
Yes.
I want to try to get you to think back to some of the early testimonies here. You seem to have difficulty remembering some things that happened 35 years ago. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that unusual?
No, it was 35 years ago.
Were you generally aware, and if so, how did you become aware of the police investigation?
There were pictures in the newspaper about the police investigating. I believe it was also on some news outlets on television that they were investigating police things.
I'm directing your attention to 35 years ago when Kathy Durst disappeared. Are you generally familiar with the investigation as it progressed for the first few months?
Yes.
Were you familiar with it through media reports? That's newspaper, television, and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Was Kathy having an affair about this time? By an affair, I mean a romantic affair where she was seeing a man. Did she tell you about that? I don't know if we got your answer. Was Kathy having an affair?
Yes, she was.
Okay. Did she ever introduce you to that man?
No.
Did she ever introduce you to any of her cocaine dealers?
What?
Did Kathy have a cocaine problem?
Yes.
Did you do much more?
You know, when we spoke to Bob, and Bob said that Kathy was innocent, it's just, I don't know, a knee-jerk reaction just to say, oh my God, I'll call hospitals.
Sure.
And we did call hospitals, and I think I also testified for Mr. Lewin that at some point I was watching some television show when TV shows were live, and they had an audience, and I called Bob and I said, I think I see Kathy in the audience at the show. And he asked me the name of the show, and I told him, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it now.
That's all right.
Years ago.
Well, what was your feeling as to whether there was a need for you to do anything more than what the police were doing?
I figured the New York City Police would do what they wanted, and I kind of had my own theory about what she might have done. So. Next one.
Well, let me ask you this way. Now, when at some point Bob had a lawyer that represented Nick Scoopetta. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Did you ever meet Peter Schwartz?
No.
Did you see him when he was testifying here?
I saw him in the hallway.
Okay. Did you see the photograph of him earlier, back in the day? Right now it's 2017, but did you see the photograph of him that as to how he looked back in 1982, 1981, 1979? Now, do you see that person?
Yes.
Have you ever met him?
Yeah.
Okay. Did Kathy, when she told you she was having an affair, name the person?
She did, and I wish I could remember. I know I was a blues musician, but I honestly can't remember his name, and I've tried.
Did she ever say anything about a fellow medical student, later doctor, that she was having an affair with?
No.
Like you can take that down. Now, I believe you said that for a while you and Stuart Altman lost contact from Bob, where you wouldn't talk to him at 14 as frequently as you had in the past. After Kathy's disappearance and until the Janine Pirro appeared on the scene. Is that about the time frame? Now, we spent quite some time yesterday on testing your memory about statements that Mr. Durst may have made to you. And I'm not going to ask you about content of those statements, if there were. I'm simply going to ask you about your recollection about when you spoke to Mr. Durst. Understand?
Yes.
Well, let's take Mr. Bagley for first. Oh. Do you recall now when you began speaking to Mr. Bagley?
Gosh, I would guess in the late 90s or early 2000s.
Okay. For a frame of reference, was it before or after Bob was charged in Galveston, which would have been in late 2001?
I don't remember if I spoke to him, after Kathy disappeared or not. I know I did speak to him after that.
Okay, well, you speak of Mr. Bagley. All right, but around the time that Bob was charged in Galveston, did you speak to Mr. Bagley during that time?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, after Bob was charged in Galveston, Stuart visited him in the jail in Pennsylvania, where he was first arrested later, correct?
Yes.
Did you visit him in the jail in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
And did you talk to him on the phone?
No. I had a, no.
No, you had a what?
They allowed me to sit with Bob and Stuart.
As far as you know, those were private conversations, weren't they? I'm not asking you what happened. And Stuart was seeing him as a lawyer.
Yes.
All right. Then you mentioned that you learned of Susan Berman's murder through reading it in the New York Times, right?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to show you an article that's dated January 6, 2001 from the New York Times, and ask you if this is the article by which you became aware that Susan Berman had been killed.
Who labeled us?
Yes, what's the
Jinx.
Jane.
Jane? All right, and we're going to pick that, we'll enlarge that a little bit. Just read it to yourself a moment. All right, is that the article about which you first became aware of the murder of Susan Berman? Does this help you remember that you first heard about it in January after she was killed in December?
Yes, because I made a mistake.
Okay.
And I was wrong.
All right. Now, let me explore the accuracy of your memory on dates. If you had to tell the court on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're not accurate at all, and 10 being you're really accurate about dates, where would your memory fall on the dates that you've mentioned in your testimony?
Depending on his questions rather between 5 and 8.
Okay.
I'm going to go with a 10.
Okay, 10 is perfect memory, and 1 is you don't remember it. And you said that you don't remember a number of questions.
That's correct.
Okay. So, is it possible that conversations that you had, that you believe you had with Mr. Durst, took place later than you testified yesterday?
Yes, it's possible.
Okay. Well, you just tell us.
You know, when I went back to my room last night, and I had time to think that I wasn't being pressured by Mr. Rowan, and honestly, he's had a lot of pressure since 2015 that I hadn't imposed as proper. It's not funny either.
Okay.
As she is talking, looking directly at me, making eye contact, as if she's speaking to me directly.
Okay, Mr. Lewin, here you are. Okay, go ahead. Keep talking.
It could have been, you know, it could have been, oh gosh, 2001, it could have been 2004. You know, I remember talking to God, but I honest to God, can't, you know, when I'm thinking back, I'm trying to think clearly right now, and, you know, not every answer I give isn't in question for validity. I honestly can't remember what to do.
So, you said it could have been 2001, could have been 2004, could have been even later?
Yes.
Okay, so, we know that beginning when Bob was arrested, following Morris Black's death, late 2001, clearly, Stewart was one of his lawyers,
yes.
right?
Yes, Stewart was one of his lawyers in 2001.
And so, what you were told, if you were, have you, well, let me ask you this, do you sometimes mix up what you've heard from Stewart with what you've heard from other people and what you may have read in the newspaper?
It's entirely possible.
Have you done that with what you think you've heard from Bob?
It's entirely possible.
So that, is it possible that what you've related as hearing from Bob, you actually heard from Stewart?
It's possible.
And I want to explore that too with you for a moment, because I don't want to reveal the content of the statements, but is it true that you and Stewart talk a lot together?
We've been married 44 years, yes, we talk a lot.
Okay. And so, some of the things that you've heard from Stewart is what he's heard from Bob in his attorney-client relationship, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not asking you to speculate. Has that happened?
Yes.
Oh. So have you or have you not confused what Bob may have told you with what Stewart has told you? Bob, you may answer. Have you lost track of the question?
Yes, I do.
So, the bottom line, what you told Mr. Lewin yesterday about being in Los Angeles. Can you say that you heard that from Bob, or may have heard it from Stewart? Or do you know?
Sitting here right now, because I really did think out a lot last night by myself. You don't know until you don't have to. And I actually can't tell you whether I heard it from Stewart or from Bob. I wish I could.
Okay.
I really wish I could, because it would make me feel a lot better.
Well, let's take, and the only reason I'm repeating what you said is to identify those statements.
I understand.
Not waiving anything about
I
them.
understand.
What is your best testimony today about whether Bob told you that, or that's something you heard from Stewart?
I really can't. I wish I could remember. I really wish I could. You know, over the course of a bunch of years, everything just got drunk. I don't remember whether it was Bob on the phone saying or whether it was Stewart saying it's, you know, I don't remember. I wish I did.
We've identified the statement. Don't waive any privilege on that. You said that you don't know whether that actually came from Bob or came from Stewart.
Right.
The statement we identified that Bob was in Los Angeles.
Yes.
You now said that you're not sure whether that came from Bob or came from Stewart. Am I right?
Right.
Well, you tell us, what was the relationship, assuming that it came from Stewart, not from Bob, to you, in your ears? What was the relationship between Bob and Stewart?
Stewart and Bob had at the time, attorney-client relationship.
Let's go at it this way. Without asking for a legal conclusion from me, was Bob Durst a client of Stewart Altman?
Yes.
Then Stewart Altman billed for his time in talking to Bob and giving him advice.
Yes, he billed for time.
And what time period did he bill for? I mean, what a typical time period.
Definitely from 2001 to 2016, I believe. And prior to that, and prior to 95, we never, he did some civil work for Bob.
I want to see if we can distinguish or perhaps not draw a line between the type of work. Did Bob confer with Stewart, and Stewart conferred with him on many different issues?
Yes, he conferred with.
I'm not asking exactly what the issues were, because it could probably be privileged, but is it true that Stewart was in a position of being Bob's personal counselor for years?
Yes.
Well, do you know whether Bob was in Los Angeles at the time, in December?
No.
All right. It's been reported in lots of media, both television shows, print, and so forth, that Bob was in San Francisco in December of 2000. Have you seen those reports? Have you seen it on the Jinx? Seen it on any of the TV programs?
Yeah, it's possible. I don't have to watch anything, but it's possible.
Okay. Well, when Mr. Hood was asking you yesterday, the first question had to do with whether Bob was in California in December, right? Recall that? Now, your answer, I believe, was you thought so.
Yes.
correct? California, were you aware that Bob had a home in Northern California, north of San Francisco?
Yes.
Okay. That's quite different from Los Angeles, isn't it?
Yes.
What is your level of familiarity with the geography of California?
0.
All right. So, when you said that you thought that you heard either from Bob, now you said you don't know whether it was from Bob or from Stewart, that Bob had been in Los Angeles. You understand there's a big difference?
Yes.
Between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Not only in distance, but in attitude and a lot of other things. Okay. What is your knowledge about having a home in Northern California?
I don't have home in Eureka.
Do you know where Eureka is?
No.
Ever been there?
No.
Ever looked on a map to see where it is?
I have a friend in high school moved there, but that's all I know.
Okay. Now, again, I want to try to explore when any conversation would have been had between you or your husband and Bob after Susan Berman's death. You said that it could have been in 2001, and you said it could have been in 2004. Could any of the conversations have been as recently as 2007, 10 years ago?
It's possible.
Okay. But from, at least from the point that Bob was arrested in Galveston in late 2001, there has been, Stuart Altman has been his lawyer in that particular case, right?
Yes.
So that anything that you heard, Bob heard, you heard or Stuart heard, was during the existence of that relationship. You understand the question? I'm not asking you whether, what the relationship was, only that the time frame would have been during the existence of that association.
Yes.
Okay. You and Stuart Altman, your husband, attended the Galveston trial, correct?
Not the entire thing, but yes.
And were there times, I'm not asking what was said, but were there times when you and Stuart met with one or more members of the trial team, the lawyers?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall that there were other persons attending the trial that were reporting to the trial team?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not asking you what was said, but there were frequent conversations between Stewart and you and the trial team?
Yes.
Mr. Lou, I'd ask you some questions about the movie All Good Things. First, just as preliminary, it is true that they didn't use the names Bob Durst or Seymour Durst or Kathy Durst in the movie. It was a make-believe movie, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Lewin asked you if Bob said that he liked it, you said yes. And what did he say, if anything, about the portrayal of Seymour Durst as being, and in the movie, of course, Seymour is portrayed as an overbearing, mean father?
I don't know.
You know, okay, fair enough. Is it true that through the years of suspicion, a lot of people have not stood by Bob like you and Stewart have?
That's correct.
And what have you noticed physically about the toll that this years of suspicion has had on Bob?
When I first saw Bob, 1.5 years, I recognized him.
You mean here in California? So what has the toll been on him, as you've noticed?
It's
physically
unbelievable. I think he's not the same person.
You're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I want to ask you if you, through the years, noticed that Bob has some unusual personality traits.
Yes, he does.
Has that caused some people to think he's a little unusual?
Yes.
But you are Bob's friend, aren't you?
Yes.
And Stewart is also.
Absolutely.
But Bob does come to you and to Stewart for advice, doesn't he?
Yes.
Is it sometimes difficult to set on one side the legal counseling that you and Stewart get from the simple being a friend?
It's very difficult. I don't think the Stewart can delineate at all. I know that I think that Bob is a friend, and I can counsel him in any way that I can. But I know that Stewart has this, amazing way, both to Bob as a friend and as a counselor, working with him where he can. Whether that's making Bob feel a little better, when he's in a bad situation, or actually, calling for some people call, for illegal calls. It's just not as he is.
Okay.
And I try to do it.
Well, working in his law office for many years, what is your view of the role of the lawyer and the lawyers employed in ministering to the needs of a client, and particularly a needy client, someone that's in jail?
I've watched through it not only with a whole bunch of clients, and it's more than just what happens in the courtroom, or asking a client what happens in the courtroom. It's being concerned with their health, their mental health, being concerned with, maybe even just telling them through the day. Or maybe, when possible, calling, how are you doing? The student does it all the time. So it's not just, being in a courtroom, it's kind of engaging the whole person, because I think that's what makes a good lawyer and a good counselor. And I try to help whenever I can. I know the student's office, I talk to clients all the time about stuff. It's not strictly legal, but I wouldn't talk to them if they weren't still a client.
You want to stop the video?
All right, it's coinciding with the break in the original examination. It is 3 o'clock now. We'll return at 3:15. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. And we'll see you back at 3:15.